So Molly, it's a pleasure seeing you. It's been years since, yeah, I'm over here.
Yes.
It's been some years since I met you for the first time around, and I'm really happy that you were able to join us this way. I'm gonna leave the questions to Q sitting right here,
Hi.
Hi.
and the small crowd of wonderful people who showed up. And the recording will then go on our YouTube channel, and it will go to Raptus as well.
Okay, great.
So I'm gonna see if I can turn up the volume just slightly here. No. Yeah, as I said, I'm happy to see you. We're really glad that you could join us this way, and thank you for doing so. I know it's early.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And I just wanted, before we started, I just wanted to thank you for having me. And I'm so sorry that I missed this yesterday. I don't know. I don't know what happened with my schedule. And I'm sorry I can't be at the festival in person. I really love small festivals so much, and I love local festivals. They're truly like what forms like the backbone of comics and what really brings out the most talented people. So I'm really sorry I can't be there, and it's utterly on me, and it is not the fault of the festival at all. I because it seems like such a wonderful thing. So thanks for being flexible with me.
You're welcome.
And thanks in return for your flexibility. We're really happy to have you here and to see you here. And I'm going to be the one sort of moderating what I think is going to be a lot of you talking to us about what you've been doing as a cartoonist and what you hope to do in the future. And I think I'm not speaking too much when I say that this small group, we're all queer creators. So I think it's going to be
The best.
just a really good time. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So hi and good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. Up a little bit early for Los Angeles, but it is okay.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we got afternoon here after a long day of festival last day.
Yeah.
So,
How was the festival?
it's so nice. Thank you. It's rather small, but it's such a close-knit comics community that we got here in Denmark. It's not the biggest, but it's really nice, and a lot of people know each other. So it's
Yeah.
really fun, sort of big get together almost.
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's like the best kinds. Like truly, I also canceled a bunch of like larger conventions this fall and summer because I just couldn't like deal with them. But like the smaller ones are always the ones that I actually have fun and meet people because it is just where you always get to find that like new artist who is doing something really interesting that is just like out of this box, like so good.
Yeah, completely agreed. I think we're all really excited to just hear a little bit about who you are and what you do. Maybe you can start us up with an introduction.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Molly Ostertag. She, her pronouns. I have been making comics for, gosh, about a little over 10 years at this point, at least like professionally. And yeah, it's been quite a journey of finding my voice. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City for college, and so I learned something about sort of formal comic making there. That's a school in New York that was founded specifically to teach like dudes in the 50s how to draw superhero comics. And it's sort of evolved since then to like encompass more art forms. But it was kind of cool to go and know that it had started as a cartooning school. So that was what gave me my start. But I think before that, like probably all of you, I just loved to draw and tell stories when I was really young, and I kind of just never, like, I think everyone loves to draw and tell stories when they're young, and I kind of just never gave it up. So yeah, I've had quite a long career, and it's been kind of varied. I have drawn other people's work. I have did a webcomic with my friend that updated for like 7 years. That was Strong Female Protagonist, and sort of self-published that book, and drew a graphic novel that someone wrote. And then at a certain point, I realized that I really wanted to start telling my own stories, and that I realized how much work drawing graphic novels is, which I'm sure also everyone here knows. It is such a labor. And so I realized that if I was going to be doing that, I wanted to be telling my own stories. So that was when I wrote The Witch Boy, and the subsequent books. And those really allowed me to start exploring my voice and exploring what I loved about comics and what I wanted to draw and what kind of stories I wanted to tell. And after that, I did the Girl from the Sea, which came out last year, 2 years ago. Time is a mystery. Came out a couple years ago, and that was like a book that was also just really, really close to my heart and really fun. And so, yeah, at this point, I'm working on a couple different projects, and I sort of balance my work with animation because I live in Los Angeles, and that's also like just a comics can be very lonely, as again, I'm also sure everyone knows, which is why I love conventions so much. And so animation is a really lovely way to get to work with other people and get to sort of do similar work telling stories and working in this visual medium, but getting to do it with a team. So I kind of like to balance those two things. But comics, honestly, comics always have my heart. They're just my favorite art form. I think they're so wonderful for telling stories, and they're so unique at how they can put you into the characters' minds and how they can really immerse the reader. And yeah, I think they're just wonderful, and especially the fact that we're maybe 5 or 10 years into this boom of graphic novels and seeing all these really exciting graphic novels that aren't superhero comics, that are more personal, queer stories, especially seeing them come out. It feels like we are just at the beginning of figuring out what this medium can do, which is why I'm also excited to meet all of you, because I think everyone who makes comics and who is getting started is pushing the medium forward and exploring it in different ways. So that's what I have to say about comics.
Oh, well, I hope to get you to say a little bit more about
I do.
comics,
I have plenty.
Because when you say, comics is it's a great way to start exploring your own voice and telling your own stories, and that we're seeing this new bloom of things happening. Can you elaborate a little bit about what it means for you to tell your own stories, and what kind of stories you found inside yourself once you started exploring that through The Witch Boy and the subsequent things?
Yeah. I think so. Like, what I love about comics is that it's sort of the only visual storytelling medium that you can do totally on your own. You can write it and draw it and just sort of lock yourself away and then come out with this fully finished thing. And that's really, really special. And The Witch Boy was really kind of emotional because it was the first story that I'd written for myself to draw. And I wrote it, it's like obviously a book with all these queer themes, but like I think people are always surprised when I say this, but I wrote it before I was out, like even to myself. And so I was exploring those themes, but in this way where I almost couldn't even recognize what they were. And what they meant. I was kind of just following what felt right to me for the story, and especially having it be kind of, I think there's something magical about everyone's like first book, because it's everything you've been holding up and wanting to say for your entire life. And so that book was really just me trying to tap into things from like my childhood and how I felt about the world and how I felt about magic and all these different ideas, and kind of weave them all into a story. And so it was this very, at times, very intuitive process to figure out how to tell that story, and very emotional because I just loved, like, I just love Aster, and I feel this connection to that character that feels a little different than any other character that I have, where I just, he just feels like a part of me that is on the page. And so I think that series was really exciting because as I was drawing it, I came out as queer, and sort of started to realize what those themes were in that book. And I was like, oh, of course, that makes sense. And then sort of the next two books in the trilogy, I could explore those ideas a little bit more and kind of map some of that coming out process and the process of finding community. I could sort of explore ideas of that through the book. So yeah, I think they're really beautiful. My spouse Nate makes also makes like fiction stories and fantasy stories, but also makes these really beautiful personal stories that are. And I'm always like amazed at his bravery because they are so incredibly authentic and true to him. And I think for me, I like to kind of wrap it in a couple layers of metaphor and fiction and story, and kind of really put it on another character. But the themes and the emotions in them still are always very much like things that I've felt. And yeah, that's what I find. Just making stories is just so incredibly cathartic and lets you learn about yourself in a really exciting way.
Completely agree. And I think we all agree that once you make something, you cannot help but put part of yourself in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I hear you say too, right? With I can't believe that you started writing The Witch Boy before you went out. That was
Yeah.
wow. Just
Yeah,
to
I
get
know.
everyone.
It's like I should have known.
Well, I think pretty much all of us here has a moment like that.
Yeah. No, it takes a little longer than like it should. Everyone else is like, we knew, and you're like, I didn't know.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Just to get everyone up to speed, the Witch Boy series is, of course, a yeah, you all are nodding. Okay, I think we'll be fine. But it's of course a graphic novel series about a boy called Aster who is a witch or wants to be a witch, is a witch in a family in which boys don't become witches, and then he figures that out.
Thank you for
Thank
pitching
you
that
so
for
much.
me. I'm so bad at pitching my own book, so I appreciate it.
It's not always easy. This is why we have friends and allies and people on our team pitch them for us.
Totally.
I would love to hear a little bit more about. And then after the Witch Boy trilogy, then you've made Girl from the Sea. And I would love to hear a little bit about how your perspective has changed. If it has, what kind of stories are you then telling, right? After you got that first trilogy out of your system, then what happened? Can you talk to us about that?
Oh, totally. Yeah, and The Girl from the Sea was actually based on, so The Girl from the Sea is a young adult romance. It's about a Selkie, a seal girl who comes out of the ocean and falls in love with a human girl, Morgan. Morgan is closeted and is not ready to come out, and so they're sort of having this secret relationship. But Keltie cannot stay a secret for various reasons. And so the book is about that, and it was such a scary book to make in a way because it was very, very personal. It's based on a short 3-page comic that I made when I was in school, that was kind of just a similar theme, similar setting, also about a Selkie, also kind of like this lesbian romance. And so that was, again, I was done with The Witch Boy and I was feeling a little lost for inspiration. And going back to something I'd made when I was like a lot younger, really helped me just remember like, oh, this was a story that I could tell much more in this. Like I put a lot into these 3 pages and I could make it so much longer. So yeah, it's set in Nova Scotia. It's set on an island that my family spent all of our summers on. When I was a kid, my parents are both teachers, so they would have the summers off, and we would just spend our time on this island. And like I would be I have a sister, but like there weren't like a lot of kids around, so I would kind of just walk around by myself and imagine that like someone would come and be my friend or be something more. And so that was really kind of tapping into that teenage and preteen like loneliness and wishing for a friend and wishing for someone who would just be a perfect friend who would understand me. That's really where that book came from. And then kind of also using that to then explore queerness and tell this queer love story. And the legend of the Selkie, I don't know if that's like common here at all. It's definitely like more of a Scottish thing. But it's the idea that it is a woman or a girl who wears a seal skin and she lives with seals, but then she takes off the seal skin and comes onto land. And the classic folktale is that a man steals her seal skin, and that means she has to live with him. She can't go back to the sea, and she has to marry him and have his children. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of explore that because there's so much there about you know, the wildness of women and the wildness of love and trying to kind of control another person. And I wanted to kind of explore that in a queer context. And so what if the sealskin is not stolen? What if it is given up freely? But also what if Morgan is still trying to keep Keltie, the Selkie, in a box? She is still trying to say, like, I can be with you, but we can't be public. I can't acknowledge you to anybody. And so that in its way is its own way of trying to control this wild person, and in a way control herself as well. So that was, it was a definitely a really emotional book. And it was scary because it just felt I think the witch boy, I'd separated myself a bit from the character by these layers of like the character's identity. And, neither of the characters are exactly me and Girl from the Sea, but both of them are very much parts of myself. And even just drawing kind of the romance scenes that made me so happy, I also felt they felt so vulnerable. Because I was just, yeah, you are aware that you're showing parts of yourself that are private. And so, yeah, it was a really like sometimes hard process, but I'm very proud with how it came out. And that was the first book that I drew like half of it, and then, or I penciled half of it, and then I just had to go and do it all over again because I realized that like the story wasn't done yet. And so it was a real process. It took quite a while to get to its final form. But it's one of those things that I'm so glad I had the time and the trust from my editor to be like, all right, it's just not quite there yet. I need to work on it, but like I promise it will get there. There's something here that like I need more time to bring out. So yeah, that's the Girl from the Sea.
No, for sure. And when you read it, I think it's very clear that it's elevated in so many ways. In just the terms of the art and the storytelling, can you tell I love The Girl from the Sea a lot?
You?
And I love that you've been talking to us about how both characters are kind of you, and an exploration of not only yourself, but also queer love in general, and myths, and using that whole angle. I think is that something that you're going to continue doing forever and ever? Is that the idea?
Definitely. Yeah, I think I think, and I didn't know this to start when I started drawing comics, but I think like as I've continued doing it, the thing I've realized is that I just am interested in telling stories about people loving each other and kind of all these different forms, and queer people loving each other, but again, sometimes romance, sometimes familial, sometimes friendship, and how you can, the complexities of loving people is something that is so interesting to me. And what I love about comics is that in a way you're the writer, but you're also the actors. I really love trying to capture my characters' really subtle emotions and figure out how to draw those the nuances of emotional conversations, and how to show that one character is loving someone fully and the other character is loving them but is closed off in some way, or has something they need to work through before they can fully kind of like open themselves up. There's all these ways to show that in body language. And something that I always am amazed by when I draw comics is I will write so much more dialogue, and I'll end up taking out so much because I realize I just don't need it. I realize that the silent panel and just the face like tells the story so much better than the words do. And that's like it's cool to I'm always curious like how much that comes across, because I think everyone has their own personal comic drawing style, and so I'm always curious like, are the things I use to signify this emotion, like does that make sense to other people? But it seems like it does. I knock on wood.
That's the response you're getting, I'm sure, from people reading it.
Yeah.
I hope, at least.
Yeah.
The complexities of loving people. What a great quote. I notice when I read your work, it's very seldom that we've got good versus bad, good versus evil, if that makes sense. And pretty often that every character is very sympathetic in their own way, or just trying to do good, and then that clash comes in. How do you go about writing something like that?
Yeah, I don't think I have any purely evil characters. It doesn't make sense to me as a concept. Although I would like to explore more like bad people, because I think it's fun and interesting to explore that. But yeah, I think I honestly think that comes for me. When I was a teenager, I LARPed, live action role play.
Yes.
And it was a specific kind of like summer camp situation where, and I would often be like the staff member at this LARPing summer camp. And when you're the staff member, your job is like, okay, you're playing the bad guy, or you're playing Goblin number 5. You're playing the evil guard of the evil queen. And when you're playing those characters, even though you're like, my role in this story, I'm the kids at the summer camp are the heroes, my role is to be the villain, but you still think like, okay, what does Goblin number 5 want from life? Like, who are my friends? What are my goals? What do I do when I'm not, stealing treasure from hobbits or whatever? And so that I think is really what I attribute that interest to, is just the idea that no one is ever a straw man. No one is ever just a cardboard figure. That's something that's very important to me in stories, is to never just have a flat figure who is just there to be a villain, because it's just not how people are. And even if they have very villainous effects on other characters, and even if they are not a good person by any means, it still is really interesting to just acknowledge that they have their own personal motivations, and they think they're being right in some way, or they know they're being wrong, but they're enjoying being wrong, or yeah, kind of that they have a feeling about it. So yeah, I think I definitely, just a lot of writing for me is kind of imagining myself as the characters and just thinking of what they would do, and kind of, I think that again comes from that LARPing and like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons role playing background of, yeah, some nods of like pretending and trying to inhabit a character, and really just be like, what does the world look like through their eyes? What makes sense? What would their reaction be? Yeah, so I try to do that with every character, and I'm glad that comes across.
It really does, and it comes across in the fact that now the drama can happen not because the plot needs it to happen, but because two characters are just different in some way, or a misunderstanding has been happening. Is that something you plan for when you make your story? Like, is that part of the writing process? You're like, okay, now I need them to fight.
Definitely. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like my scripts definitely are very, very fluid when I'm writing them. But there usually are a couple scenes that stay and that sort of are there from the beginning. And often it is like an emotional fight, because you sort of say truths in those moments. And I love seeing a character kind of come up against the limits of what they can do. And sort of meet that wall. I think in Girl from the Sea, it's like Kelty is like, I need you to, for complex reasons, I need you to take me to this party and like acknowledge me as your girlfriend. And Morgan is like, that is the one thing I cannot do. I could do everything up until that point, but that, like, I'm meeting that wall right now. And that's like a very interesting emotional place for me. Yeah, and I think I just also, the other thing I'm very interested in is wish fulfillment, and especially because I'm making stories that are mostly for kids and teenagers, and especially queer kids and queer teens. Making wish fulfillment stories, so often we think of that as like a boy is a chosen one and he gets a sword and he is chosen to like he is gonna be the best fighter and he is gonna defeat everyone and win all these things. And I think that is a certain kind of wish fulfillment. That's something that even resonates with me a lot. Like I those stories are really powerful, but I'm really interested in finding other forms of wish fulfillment. So the wish fulfillment of, what if somebody loved me unconditionally? What if somebody understood me when I didn't even understand myself? What if somebody was there for me? And what if somebody pulled me out of my comfort zones also, and kind of pulled me kicking and screaming into the next phase of my life? Like, those are all forms of wish fulfillment as well, and I think especially very queer forms of wish fulfillment. And so that's like something I'm just so interested in, is like, how do we find those really satisfying stories that still have the conflict? That was why I rewrote The Girl from the Sea. Actually, I had written it as just a really soft love story, and there was kind of a conflict of Morgan being closeted, but it wasn't super, I was like a little uncomfortable leaning into that too much. I didn't really want to show homophobia in the story. And so it just was very soft. And I realized about halfway through drawing that there wasn't really a conflict, and that Kelty, the sulky girl, doesn't really want anything besides to be with Morgan. And so I sort of had to put it aside and think about it a lot, and realize, like, both that she needed to want something really specific, and that they needed to come into this much more intense form of conflict, because that will lead them to a much stronger place in the end. And so that was interesting, because I definitely started that out by being very self-indulgent and just being like, I'm just going to draw them going on dates and kissing and like wandering around this beautiful landscape that I know really intimately, and kind of doing the things I wish I'd done as a teenager. And then realizing that for it to be a story, it has to have conflict in some way, and it has to have that conflict that pushes the characters to grow. So yeah.
I'm so happy you're mentioning self-indulgence, because that's the next thing I wanted to ask you about. I read a little bit of an interview with you where you mentioned that The Girl from the Sea is in many ways quite a self-indulgent story. And now you're mentioning that, but also injecting that conflict into it in order to make not only the story stronger, but also in a way the characters' relationship at the end stronger. Can you talk a little bit more about that, finding that joy, that self-indulgence, and making something out of it?
Yeah. It's such a it's such a balance of balancing, because I think if you're not being self-indulgent with your work, like what are you doing? Like I truly don't understand the point if you're not tapping into that, like what would your 12-year-old self think is like so cool and fun. I try really, really hard to kind of stay in touch with myself at that age, and like read my journals and just remember like what I thought was exciting, because I'm making work for kids that age. And so yeah, definitely my self-indulgence is for that younger version of myself, and kind of what made me really excited. Yeah, I think it's both like, yeah, there's just no point. And especially comics are so hard to make, and they're so hard to draw. It takes so long, and like your hand hurts, and it's just like, if you're doing it and you're not enjoying like a large part of it, then like you need to kind of readjust and look at what like why you're drawing it, and kind of try to maybe rewrite your story so that there are things that you're really excited about drawing. So yeah, I think because I draw my own comics, so much of it I focus on what do I want to draw. And that's both like landscapes and characters, but also more specifically, it's like emotional scenes, and what kind of emotions do I want to show on these characters? And then how can I get them there? And how can I get them there in the way that is like the most fun for me to draw and the most interesting for me? So yeah, I think leaning into your self-indulgence, and also recognizing, I think that it can be very self-indulgent to have like very angsty characters. And so that's really fun. And so figuring out how to get them there, and how to kind of set it up so that it's as satisfying for the reader as it is in your head. I think that's actually the really important thing, is that I'd drawn the girl from I'd started The Girl from the Sea, and it was very satisfying for me to draw them just having this sweet, soft romance, because they were kind of a setup in my head already. And then I realized this is not really going to be as interesting. Like, I need to make the readers care about this as much as I care about it. And so I need to make them feel like they are being self-indulgent by reading this book. But to do that, you sort of need to introduce this conflict and set things up so that when you get that sweet, like delicious self-indulgence, it's really, really earned. Yeah, something my partner Nate says a lot is just like you have to just want the characters to hug so bad, and like never let them hug. Like it's like it's sort of this like very, it's like you're like being a little bit cruel and withholding. But then, you know, when it happens, when they get close to hugging, when it happens eventually, it is so good. And so I think that that's always kind of figuring out where you want to really punch the readers in the heart with emotions, and sort of building up to that a lot, is yeah, it's this very, very fun balancing act of just, I don't know, having, again, there's those key scenes that I have as soon as I'm starting to write a book, and I know the emotions that are wrapped up in them, and even if I don't know exactly what they're saying, I kind of know it's these two personalities coming to a conflict, and the differences between them being laid bare. And so it's like, how can I do everything to sort of build up to this point and make it feel as emotional to a reader as it feels in my head?
That makes sense. It almost feels like when you're saying balancing act, right? It's like we got this wellspring of joy, self-indulgence, all of that good stuff. We take it and then mold it with our adult storyteller hands that understand how to put that. At least that's
Absolutely.
sort of what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah.
Which is a great balancing act to do.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting. I feel like this is shifting a bit, but I think as like in the last 10 years of telling queer stories, there's been an interesting there have been so many queer stories told by mostly straight people, and those stories are often defined by tragedy and defined by homophobia and prejudice. And there's this very correct, very, very understandable reaction to that from queer people who are like, I don't want the stories where the lesbian dies. I don't want the stories where the trans person is like attacked. Like I don't, and which is like extremely, extremely valid. But then I'm always like, okay, so where do we go? Because it can't just be a happy, like if it's just happy, it's not quite a story. There needs to be a thread of conflict and so it's kind of figuring out how to do that, I guess, and how to make those characters really dynamic, and how to really, I think with queer stories, we all have a lot of fear. And so it is really trying to figure out how to tell those stories without fear, which is very difficult and a lifetime of work. I don't think I don't know when I will like ever be fully without fear when I'm writing queer stories, because they are so personal and vulnerable, and you're so worried that someone will read it and feel hurt in some way, because we all sort of carry these like certain traumas around, from being queer people in this world. So there's a lot of fear around it, which I think is like okay to feel, but then also letting yourself tap into like the true deep emotions and not letting that fear define the story, I think is really important, and it's something I'm trying to do really, really hard right now. It's something I'm thinking about a lot at the moment.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I see some nodding around the table. A lot of thinking about this whole thing. I have a hard question. What do you think? What do you think the future looks like for queer storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like I'm American. I think we're in our country. I think we are entering a bit of a we're seeing a lot of attacks on queer stories, and honestly a lot of attacks on, my books are banned in certain places. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. We're seeing this pushback that I think is happening because we have had maybe 10 years of or maybe even just like 5 years of like joyful queer stories for children, for young people, and we are seeing a lot of pushback, and it's upsetting but also not surprising, and so I think I'm despite that I am very excited because I'm seeing queer stories happening that are blowing my mind. Like there are just things that are coming out that are on sort of like levels that I couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. Stories where the queerness is very casual, or stories that are so intrinsically and specifically about queerness. That's what I'm really interested in. I think this is a TV show, not comics, but like I just watched a League of Their Own TV show, which is all about it's about like a women's baseball league in the 40s, and it is just like integrally like watching it. I had never seen anything like it. I'd never seen anything that was so representative of my experience and of my community's experience, and it was something that felt like it was truly made without fear. And so I think that that's what I'm really excited for in the future is just to see what do we do when we are not worried about representing ourselves to straight and cis people? What do we do when we are making stories for ourselves and for our community, and when we are not thinking too hard about avoiding stereotypes, and when we are just not thinking about straight people at all? That's something that I am starting to see, and especially in indie comics, honestly. Like that's why I just like always will love comics forever, is because you can just do it. You can just sit down and make the work, and it can be something that would be banned. It can be something that no publisher would pick up, because it is too niche or too controversial or too adult in some way, and you can just make it and share it with your community. That is like really the power of comics and zines. And so I'm excited to just continue seeing that, because I think in some ways there have been people always making that work, but I think we are just sort of slowly pushing into more mainstream spaces, and I'm excited for seeing stories that are made without fear.
Amazing. And it's true, right? We are seeing stories in more mainstream spaces, which I think is amazing to see. 10 years ago, there was nothing like it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I always think of it like a spectrum. I work for sort of my most mainstream job is that I work for Disney and I make cartoons for Disney. And my least mainstream job right now, at least, is like making this web comic that I'm publishing on a newsletter, and it's very indulgent. It's very much just for me. It's a little older than my other stuff, and so I always think of it like a spectrum. I'm trying to put queerness in my Disney stories, but I also know that it is being made for this giant corporation, and it is being made expecting to go around the entire world. And what I can do is restricted because of that. They are pouring so much. It's so expensive to make a cartoon. They're pouring so much investment into it. Like I hate talking about art in that way, but that is sort of how it is when you're making that kind of work. And it's not to say that it's not satisfying. Like, you can do really great work in that way, but it's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end is the things I can just make by myself at home. And even that, I'm still pushing myself to try and make those works without being afraid of how they'll be received. So there's always room for both. And the things that happen in the really obscure communities, the stories we are seeing in TV right now and in movies, the queer stories, were being told in indie comics 10 and 15 years ago. And so we are always so much ahead of what the mainstream is interested in. And that's like, I just find that incredibly exciting.
And interesting too.
Yeah.
Can you lift the veil a little bit on some of your own future of comics, your own future projects?
Yeah. Right now I'm doing this webcomic called Darkest Night, and I publish it on my Substack newsletter. I put out, and it's just been really fun. After doing The Witch Boy and after doing The Girl from the Sea, I felt like I'd drawn just a lot of comics in that specific format. Pages like this and 2 pages and they turn and it's for print. And so I was feeling very constricted by that. And like I kind of explored everything I wanted to do with that specific format. And so this comic is drawn all like a long scroll. You just read it. I usually post like about the equivalent of about 7 pages a week. And you can just read it all as a long scroll. And there's something so intuitive about that. I think even just, we are on our phones so much. We are on desktop computers and scrolling, and like we're just so used to reading things in that format. And so there's something really intuitive and satisfying about that. And obviously I didn't invent that. That's like a webtoons format. I was inspired by like Emily Carroll's early comics. She did really, really interesting things with that format. And so that's just been very fun. And then, so that's like the more technical thing that excites me about that comic. And then in terms of the narrative, it's older. It's a bit more, I kind of like knew what the story was, but I'm also sort of writing it as I'm drawing it. I didn't have a really strict script, and I've changed sort of certain things and changed the ending as I've been making it. And I think just allowing myself that freedom has been really cool. And it just is, it's an older story. It's more of like an older young adult story. And the characters can, like, I'm just like letting myself do whatever I want. So like they can swear and they can smoke weed, and that like it can kind of get into these sort of like obscure emotions of like depression and family trauma and being closed off from other people. And it can sort of explore those in a way that again feels incredibly self-indulgent to me. But that I hope is like interesting for people. It's definitely, I kind of always feel this with my comics, but especially this one, I'm like, I hope people are enjoying it. And if they don't, I would understand, because I'm being like just a little bit more obscure. I'm not laying things out as clearly as I have in my other stories. But that to me feels like what I really wanted to do at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we've established, it's the self-indulgence and the joy that might be the thing that actually resonates with people. And then you shape it into good stories because we can do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's just like anything that makes you excited. Sorry, I'm gonna be so cringy right now, but like in 2020 I had left my animation job, and it was the pandemic, and it was awful here, and I just was home all the time, and I got like really into Lord of the Rings fan fiction, and wrote like such a long story, queer story, and it just like bubbled out of me, and I was like, I was like possessed. Like I would just wake up in the middle of the night and lie there thinking about it, which I really hadn't done with a story since I was like a teenager. And I was like, I'm gonna post this. I'm gonna like put it under my own name because I'm so proud of it. And I wrote it so fast, and it just, I'm so glad that I had the time and the place to follow that wave of inspiration. You know, it was fan fiction. It's not something I'm ever going to sell. At the time, it has not ended up having a negative impact on my career, but at the time I was like, this is it for me.
Oh, no.
But I have to do this anyway. I use like that inspiration. I feel like it unlocked this well of interest in storytelling again, and this well of inspiration that I'm still drawing from a couple years later. I'm still kind of taking certain emotional themes that I explored in that story, and trying to find ways to put them into new characters. You know, I'm not going to just change the names and like publish it as a book, but there are just these emotional conflicts and these things that I worked out about myself and how I feel about myself and about love. And I had to work that out through this very like indulgent and like joyful form of storytelling. And so it's just always it's just always so worth it. Whether it is just like the most, I don't know, any form of creation, whether it feels like embarrassing or non-professional, and you're like, how will this lead to anything? Like that story has given me so much. Like it continues to like give me so much joy and inspiration. So I just like always encourage people to follow their passions, whatever they are.
Follow the joy seems to be the
Yeah.
theme of this talk in some way. Follow
Yeah.
the joy.
Yeah.
Where can I read this story?
Oh gosh,
I must-
it's on Archive of Our Own. Oh, I'm trying to think. I like had it. I was posting it on my Twitter for a minute, but I'm not really on there anymore. You can definitely find it. It's like linked on my Wikipedia page.
I'll go looking. I actually, because we have about 15 minutes late, and I really wanted to open up to our little audience here and just hear if anyone has any questions or any talking points. Does anyone have anything they'd like to hear elaborated upon? Perchance. I'll let you think for a bit, because we've been talking a lot about story creation and joy and being a queer creator and all that. Did you have a?
I just wanted to say hi.
You just wanted to say hi.
Hello.
You've got some fans in the audience.
Yeah, I'm just gonna break in, Molly. That's one of my girls.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Well, I'll let you think for a bit, because let me just. You might. Oh, did you have a thing?
I actually wrote down quite a few questions, but I'm really considering which one would be the most helpful. I'm both here because I'm a fan myself, but also because a friend of mine, her name is Chili, she really, really wanted an autograph. So I'm also considering maybe if there's a way to, I don't know.
That might be for another time, perhaps.
But I really like what you're telling about like courage and self-indulgence. That's something I'm personally struggling with in my own comics. I often think too much about who I'm writing it for, and sometimes I end up being consumed about that concern. Like, what if this is too personal? And then I get really scared of diving into some deeper stuff. I'm also like kind of struggling with telling stories that include my past, but I also really like autobiographical comics. They're very interesting to read, and I'm also following Indy's newsletter. So I'd like to aspire to that. But I guess I wanted to ask you, how do you kind of gain that courage to still tell stories like that? You told me you're also like thinking a lot about that recently, kind of to tell stories that come from an even more personal place without disguising it as much as, for example, a character of the opposite gender or similar.
Yeah. I think it's been a journey. Something that's been really big for me has been stepping off of social media, because I think it's very easy to get those voices in your head, and just it was incredibly, I think, making the Witch Boy and just really being like, no one's ever reacted to my stories before outside of like maybe my friends and like my dad. And so getting that reaction, it was incredibly exciting, and it's impossible to look away from it. You want to read every review, you want to look it up on Twitter and see what people are saying. And that's like fine, but it put the fear in me. It really kind of, and it put all these other voices in my head and showed me how people react. And I don't think it's always a bad thing. It's always like really interesting and good to get feedback and get criticism. And to sometimes realize like, okay, I should have been more careful with this certain plot point or this certain character type. I'm going to do that better in the future. But I think at a certain point in the last couple years, I realized that I was getting so much feedback from people, even just positive, like, I liked it, here's what I liked. It's still kind of stuck in my head. So even the idea of like people really like The Girl from the Sea, I get probably at least one message a day asking to make a sequel to that book. I probably won't make a sequel. It was like very clear to me that it was one book and that it has an ending, and I like leaving the readers imagining what the sequel is. But it's really, when people ask me, please make a sequel, of course I'm compelled. I'm like, okay, what could it be? People would probably, they would definitely buy it. They would love it. Like, but I don't have an idea for it. And so I think giving myself a little space from those voices was important. I also kind of, I read a lot of older books. I like reading a lot of things from, just the 1900s. Like I read a lot of stuff that's from like the 1940s to like the 1970s. And those are novels, not comics, obviously. But kind of just stepping outside of time a little bit and reminding myself that, this person is probably writing, and they're probably referencing conversations. Like this book came out as part of a larger culture, and it came out as part of a conversation. However, the book is still here, and I don't know what the context of it is, but it still has a message that I find really, really personal and resonant. And so reading older books and finding an emotional connection kind of helps me remember how glad I am that writer wrote without fear and wrote something really specific, and that they wrote something very personal, because if they were writing and kind of trying to make it fit exactly into their culture, the culture that book was going to come out in, I don't think it would be a book that lasted. It wouldn't be a book that I would be reading now, because it would kind of have an expiration date. It would have sort of stayed at that time period. And so trying to kind of, get in touch with those things that stand the test of time. Those are often the ones that are written from a really specific personal viewpoint. And I think also just remembering that it's such a hard thing to learn. Like I think you just learn it over the course of your life, but that your perspective is, you are the only person with that perspective, and you're the only person who can tell those stories. And that's so corny, but it's also deeply, deeply true. Like a lot of corny things, that is incredibly true. Nobody else can tell the story of your past and the story of your perspective on the world, whether you're telling it in a really clear, actual autobiographical format, or whether you're wrapping it in layers of fantasy and metaphor. It still is that is like the most beautiful thing of art, is forming this connection, feeling like an artist put their true self into the work, and by reading it, you are connecting with them in that way. That's why I love reading old work, is I love feeling like I'm connecting so deeply with someone from the past. So yeah, it's the fear is real, and the struggle is definitely real, and I think it's believing in yourself and giving yourself the space to tell those stories. And I think another actually good piece of advice is to let it percolate, let the spark grow a little bit before exposing it. So kind of sitting with something and writing it and just keeping it private. Like just do it and don't tell anyone. Don't tell anybody that you're doing it. And just don't tell anybody until it feels strong. Like it's like a little sprout of a plant, and it needs to be protected before it's strong enough to be, out in the sun. And so I think that's another thing that social media was definitely great for my career in some ways, but it really encourages people to sort of be like, oh, working on a new story, or like here's a mood board for my characters that you haven't met yet. And I think that can be so fun and you can get that little bit of validation from people saying, "Oh, I'm excited to read it," but it's I don't know. I think you need to keep them close for a little bit, and just give it the chance to grow into something before you represent what it is to anyone else.
That's really a beautiful response.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I'm hearing give yourself grace, space, and a little bit of perspective.
Yeah,
Just to
Yeah.
put it into a jingle.
absolutely.
I think unfortunately that is all the time we have to talk to you today, and I wish we had several more hours.
I know
but
this is
I'm gonna have
delightful.
to
Yeah.
close it down. I hope that we'll get to see you in person one day. That would be really fun. But I'm just so happy that you took the time to get up super early and talk to us
Yeah.
on this screen and tell us about the joy of creating and the stories that you're creating and have been.
Yeah, this
Um,
is truly so lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I could talk about this stuff for hours. I really love it.
And I'm sure I'm not just speaking for myself when I say we could listen to it for hours. So thank you so much for that. And we let's hope we'll get to see you one day either on screen again or for real. Have a really good day, Molly, and
Thank
thanks
you.
again.
All right,
Bye.
thank you. Okay. Bye everybody. Thank you.
So my name is Kermidas Nicola, and you're all watching at Art Bubble TV.